Welcome into a Christmas Eve edition of Golden Black Radio. I'm your host, Derek Schultz. Happy holidays. The holidays weren't so happy for the Boilermakers in Birmingham as they get whacked by Auburn, who many feel is the number one team in the country. In fact, they took a good chunk of the votes. Not enough to unseat Tennessee atop the most recent poll, but they're right there firmly at number 2. We're going to talk about that loss and other happenings on the basketball court, including first impressions from the college football playoff on the football field with our buddy Brian Neubert today on Golden Black Radio. But first, a thank you to our great sponsors, including Purdue Federal Credit Union, a proud partner of Purdue Athletics and the official credit card for Purdue fans. Boiler Up, East End Grill and Ripple and Company, 2 distinctive bistros across the street from one another on the far end of Main Street, the perfect place for your next event. The Whitaker Inn, this Midwestern oasis, perfect for a relaxing staycation or a weekend getaway, escape from the ordinary at the Whitaker Inn. Sand Valley Resort, celebrate all that the wilderness provides this winter at Sand Valley. Experience everything from curling and ice hockey to ice fishing and snowshoeing. Feels like I can do that right here in Indianapolis right now with how cold it is. And even the restorative benefits of a guided cold plunge in the frozen lakes. Start planning your next winter getaway by visiting sandvalleypursuits.com and our friends at the Purdue Institute for Cancer Research, which has a history of innovation and one goal for the future: defeat cancer. Purdue brings together world-class Boilermaker scientists from across the university, conducting cutting-edge research that uncovers new ways to prevent, diagnose, and treat cancer. With your support, cancer research saves lives. Join the fight and donate to the Purdue Institute for Cancer Research today. Let's bring on goldenblack.com columnist Brian Neubert, who hopefully has gotten all of his Christmas shopping done. And Brian, part of the reason that I always kind of make this show about me, which I probably shouldn't do. I should make it about the listener, but I feel like other listeners probably feel this way. I was frustrated after the A&M loss because I had already banked the Auburn game as a defeat. And I think you could tell. I know that was, it's a slightly competitive game through the first 7 or 8 minutes. I want to say it was 23-15 at one point. And I think even then I was watching and I was like, oh boy. You could tell that this matchup was just going to make for a long afternoon. Like that levee was going to break at some point, and obviously it did shortly after that.
Where would you ice fish in Indianapolis? Like the White River?
Anything you get there, you want to throw back. I can tell you that.
Hey, it's a drunk college student. I had an obstructed view seat, even though I was 10 feet from the floor. So I was watching up on the monitor. But every now and then I would see Auburn just elevate over everybody and dunk. And Janai Broome, when he made that first three, you could kind of tell that, hey, this might not play out very well for Purdue. And just the way that crowd was and the way that crowd responded to Janai Broome making that three, on top of the fact Auburn's awesome. They're not all that far off UConn last year, I think, in an absolutely loaded SEC. Whoever wins the SEC is clearly going to be your favorite going into the NCAA tournament. But Auburn just caused a lot of problems for Purdue, like they're going to cause for a lot of other people, like they caused for Houston, like they caused for Iowa State, like they caused for Ohio State, certainly. They're just an elite team. And, Purdue right now is a very, very good team that is playing an elite schedule. And, I think that the A&M game was there, could have been won, was not. Obviously, the final score of that game is a little bit deceiving because Texas A&M led by 12 with 4 minutes to go. That one I thought was gettable. This one was not gettable. I'm not sure it ever was gettable. It was Purdue just being overmatched, and Auburn did to Purdue what Purdue's been doing to a lot of people for years now. And not like everything has to even out all the time, but things are leveling off a little bit here against this caliber of opponent. And that's, I think, the important context in all of this is that Purdue's likely going to come out of non-conference play 9-4. That's a record that suggests a team that's just okay. But I think it's probably warping reality a little bit because when Purdue gets to Big Ten play, this is the rare season where things ease up a little bit. Normally it's the exact opposite. But it is Matt Painter's mindset in scheduling to schedule a really, really challenging slate in non-conference. 2, build your resume to sweet talk the computers, but also to push his team to be better when it matters more. And, Purdue didn't get the win total it has normally gotten in non-conference play, though Alabama and Ole Miss, those wins are going to age really well. Mm-hmm. But you have to hope that the computers at the end of the day really reward Purdue for what it took on and the fact that you played all of these really good, great top 10-ish type teams in non-conference play helps you down the line, even though you went 2-2 against those 4 SEC teams you played.
Is there a balance? And I understand that these things are done in advance. But is there a balance in not killing yourself? I mean, I fully get that maybe having Auburn dunk on your head for 40 minutes is more beneficial than beating nobody you by 50 points at Mackey, right? But at the same time, it just felt like, what you take from that game after all of the other games that you've already had, after getting tested multiple times already, it just, to me, it felt a little bit like overkill. Like if you were to give Matt Painter maybe true serum and say, hey, would you have backed off this game if you would have had a choice to back off this game, knowing what you know now, knowing the context of the situation, first couple of weeks without Zach-Edey, et cetera, would have taken it off? Or do you say, no, let's go ahead and get dunked on by Auburn and learn from it and take from it what we can?
Well, it's kind of an interesting question. I think now it's easy to say Purdue overscheduled. Mm-hmm. But Purdue played Auburn to get Auburn to come to Indy next year. Purdue hosted Alabama to go to Alabama next year. So they're moving parts. They had to go to Marquette because Marquette came to them.
Sure.
Last year. The other part of it too is like when you start talking to Auburn, Auburn's been really good lately. But did you know Janai Broome was going to be the front runner for Player of the Year at that time? You really didn't. Did you know Alabama was going to have Mark Sears back? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. It's just, it's so hard to project both what you have nowadays, but also what everybody else has, because nobody knows who's on anybody's team anymore. You just pick from the profile of the opponent, their recent success, their recent lack thereof, and the style of play, which I think is a very important part of it. I think Purdue wants to play these really tough defensive teams early on to get its offense right. I know things haven't looked right, but having to play against this level of competition, theoretically should make you better when you're playing Ohio State, when you're playing Michigan State, when you're playing Michigan, when you're playing Illinois, Indiana, on down the line. But I think that this did turn out to be a lot in year one post Zach-Edey, because the physical disadvantages that Purdue has been exposed as having right now are simply things that Zach-Edey covered up before. Like it's not like Purdue's guards are smaller now than they were the last couple of years. It's not like Purdue was always more physical top to bottom than these SEC teams are. It's just that they couldn't stop Zach-Edey. Zach-Edey beat them up the same way he did everybody else. And when people bracket the post against Traycoff Moran, well, before Zach-Edey could catch the ball in the middle of the bracket and dunk on people, and you could count on him to get 5 offensive rebounds a game, 3 putbacks, and 10 free throws, because that was just the nature of what he was as a player. This team, yet at this point in its development, doesn't have that same weapon of mass destruction, that same what I call baseline of productivity there. And it doesn't have the same size. Daniel Jacobson probably would have helped, but he would have gone through a lot of freshman up and downs here. But at least you would have had elite height and elite length behind you when you're trying to stop the dribble. I think that's shown up quite a bit. He would have been pushed around most likely by these teams too, but at least he would have been able to get a hand on rebounds higher than anybody else on the floor. But I just think that you have played a level of competition, but you've also played a level of physicality that this particular team was not ready for necessarily after Zach-Edey. Whether you could have seen that coming, 8 months ago, 12 months ago when the schedule was made, I don't know. You also lack that secondary ball handler that you had with Lance Jones, and when you have pressing teams on your schedule, as you did with Marquette, and obviously as you did with Penn State, being a Big Ten team, and you have to play them on the road early in the season, that's something that's been exposed to. You had no control of the Penn State part of that. But it's just, not only is this an elite schedule, or has been an elite schedule, but it's been a schedule that lines up directly with Purdue's pressure points, and it's exposed Purdue in a way that the Big Ten probably won't, but you never know. But it's also exposed Purdue in a way where you have to hope that this makes you better in Big Ten play, but also if you somehow have to play Tennessee, for example, again in the NCAA tournament, because those two teams are destined to do this forever, like the Joker and Batman, you're much better prepared than you would have been otherwise.
Even accepting that Purdue is a good team and they'll get better because Matt Painter's teams, overwhelming majority of them get better and may still win plenty of games. What concerns you about them moving forward? Like, if things don't go that way, what will be the cause in your opinion?
Well, the turnover issue is still a thing. The Auburn game was a total malfunction, and really attributable to no one thing. But and I shouldn't say malfunction. It was more Auburn than it was Purdue.
Mm-hmm.
But another game where the opponent scored 20 or more points off turnovers, and that's Purdue's clear. I don't want to say Achilles heel, because it's not an every game kind of thing. But when Purdue gets beat, that's the reason. Not just the turnover total, but the points that opponents are getting off of it. Purdue's got to be better offensively. They've got to be more physical offensively. I think they've got some real limitations defensively that they're just going to have to overcome. The rebounding is obviously a big issue, because Purdue's not as physical up front, not as big up front as they normally have been. But all that stuff means is that your margin for error is even narrower. And if you give opponents points and deny yourself opportunities offensively, it's simple math. I almost feel bad talking about this. I talk about it so much because it's so freaking obvious. Like, the more opportunities you get to score, the more you are going to score. The more layups you give your opponent, the more they're going to score, and score without having to try. It's so obvious, but it's such an important piece of the puzzle for this Purdue team. They just have to do a better job taking care of the basketball. And when they are going to turn it over, make it a travel, or just kick the ball out of bounds or something. Don't throw it to the other team going the other way. That's the biggest issue that I think Purdue deals with, or has to contend with, or has to be hyper aware of.
We've been a little doom and gloom so far in this show, so let's get optimistic because 'tis the season, and we'll just spike the eggnog here real quick. Purdue does finish the non-conference here with Toledo, and then they have what looks like a fairly light opening stretch in Big Ten play. I mean, I think most would agree Minnesota is probably the league's worst team. Northwestern's okay. They're okay. And I know at Rutgers has been tough, but I'd rather get those freshmen now than later. Can they build it back up? I mean, does this look like a favorable little stretch here to kind of catch your breath after what you said? Just, it's been running the gamut here with this non-league slate that they've had.
Yeah. I also don't think the Big Ten is anywhere near as good as the SEC.
Yeah,
and,
me neither.
Purdue's played half the SEC already. So that's kind of what I mean, is that things get a little bit easier as you get into Big Ten play. You always worry about those early road games. Purdue's got Penn State out of the way. Obviously, that didn't go well. You should be able to win at Minnesota. If you can't, then you start to worry.
Yeah.
The Rutgers thing, that's always a huge home court advantage for Rutgers. It's a place Purdue struggled, but they are so young, and Big Ten play is going to be different for them the same way it is for everybody else. You do have an opportunity here. You should beat Northwestern at home. Northwestern's always a pain in the ass to play, but Northwestern historically has been a problem for Purdue to play when it has had that one singular guy that they could just beat up and play as dirty as possible and muddy up the game and bank on the officials to not call fouls that are fouls. And, you know, this team being decentralized that way, might make Northwestern a little bit less of a problematic matchup for them. Boo Booey being gone certainly helps, but they still have a couple of 27-year-olds playing on their team. That's the other part of this too. Is this sounds like I'm carrying water for Purdue. They never talk about this. I talk about it because I think it's really important. Is that all these other teams are still playing adults? They're still going out and getting new adults every year to play, and Purdue is still building programs traditionally, which means occasionally you're going to be short of something. Occasionally you're going to be young somewhere. And when young meets a 24-year-old, especially on the road, that's going to be problematic more often than not. And Purdue's caught in a couple of those process gaps here, and no one else is, because everybody else is just, popping in adults and keeping their own guys in school the way Purdue kept Zach Edey in school last year. And it's not necessarily a level playing field. That said, Purdue's still pretty good, and Purdue has been beating those adults, for 2.5 years now, 3 years now, and we'll still beat plenty of adults this year the rest of the way. But it is a competitive imbalance in college basketball nowadays. Now, no one's crying for Purdue, nor should they be. Matt Painter could play the system the way everybody else is too, but if that's the argument you're going to make at this moment, you have to then surrender all the success Purdue's had the last 3 years. So that's not something that's not a good argument if you're really mad that Purdue's lost 4 games already. But no, Purdue should be set up for some success here early in the Big Ten season, and needs to start getting that win total moving toward where it needs to be, both to contend in the Big Ten, which they still should, but also to get into that number where you're able to get the sort of seed you want to be able to get.
Last thing here, Brian, a non-basketball thought. I know a lot of Purdue fans were watching the college football playoff. Maybe they were rooting for the Meteor Friday night in South Bend. It ended up being Notre Dame in a much more one-sided game than the final score suggests against Indiana. What were your takeaways? Because 12-team playoff, we had been waiting for it, and then we saw it, and there were 4. I don't want to call Clemson and Texas. I don't think Clemson Texas was a blowout. I thought that game got competitive. It was much more competitive to me than the other 3 games. But this is something that we've seen in college football. Hell, we've seen it in the NFL as well, where blowouts happen in the early rounds. I thought the novelty of having the games at true home sites was awesome. I was actually in Notre Dame Stadium, so maybe I'm a little bit biased, but that Friday night atmosphere was tremendous. But I wanted to get your take on it because we just saw it for the first time this past weekend, the new reality in college football.
Yeah, I didn't see Texas Clemson, so I can't speak to the one-sidedness of that game. I did watch the end, really, but only the end, or the fourth quarter of Notre Dame, Indiana. I know that was a very one-sided game. Indiana scored a couple times at the end to clean it up, to launder the final score the way Purdue basketball has in a few of its losses here this year. Ohio State beat the crap out of Tennessee. But I think that, and obviously Penn State destroyed SMU, but I think that if you're looking at the results of these playoff games as some sort of indictment of a 12-team playoff, bringing people into the playoff that don't belong there, well, SMU can go to Penn State and get killed, or SMU can go play in the Liberty Bowl, have half its team opt out, and get killed. Which one would you rather see, right? I mean, this is a big deal for these programs to get in the playoff. This is a huge deal for Indiana to get into the playoff. This was a huge deal for Tennessee to get into the playoff, as opposed to them going to some other bowl game, have their NFL guys opt out, have guys go in the portal who might not have gone in the portal otherwise at that same time. It's just comparing what happened in year 1 of the 12-team playoff to what would have happened without the 12-team playoff. I think is the question people need to ask themselves. I think Oregon is getting screwed.
Me too.
Hugely screwed. They had the best season of anybody. They won all their games. and they don't get a home game out of this. They get Ohio State for the second time this year, and they get it on a neutral site. And Ohio State people will be in that Rose Bowl just because it's in the Pacific time zone and closer to Eugene than it is to Columbus. That doesn't mean Ohio State won't have tens of thousands of fans there. Their reward for this seems like not a reward.
That might be the national championship game.
It might be. It might be.
I mean, if you were to reseed those two teams right now, certainly from a Vegas standpoint, that'd be 1 and 2 right there.
And I don't really, I can't say I'm an expert on the logistics of it all, but I would reseed things after the first game for just this reason. You don't want your best teams meeting in round 2. It's like the sectionals in basketball in Indiana. There was a time there where Lawrence North, Cathedral, and Lawrence Central, North Central, whoever it was, were all in the same sectional. So whoever won that sectional was chances are was going to win your 4A title. It was almost like a de facto state final. But I don't have any issues with the format here. I think it's good for college football. I think there will always be somebody left out, no matter what the number is, that people are going to point to and say they should be in and they shouldn't have been in. 4-team playoff, that's the case, as they learned last year with the worst case scenario unfolding in year 1 of the 4-team or however many teams were in the playoff last year. They expand to 12, and now it's poor Alabama who gets left out. It's Ole Miss. It's the poor SEC who doesn't have, the same number of teams in there that they feel like they should. So they're going to point to Indiana. They're going to point to SMU. They're going to point to probably Clemson in some cases and say they shouldn't be there. You're probably right. Look, if Indiana, I think we can all agree that if Indiana were in the SEC, they would not have had the season they had. But I think we all need to agree, too, that you get what you earn, right? That the playoff system should reward people who win all their games. Strength of schedule will be damned. I don't say that lightly. I don't mean like if Ball State wins all their games, they should go to the playoff. But when you're in either the Big Ten or the SEC and you go 10-1 or whatever Indiana's record was, 11-1, and your only loss is to Ohio State, who's still, despite the Michigan debacle, might be the best team in the country, they belong in there because they earned it. And they should have scheduled a stronger non-conference schedule. You can say that now. But who in the hell thought that this was even possible? So I would imagine that Indiana's season here wouldn't deter people now from scheduling a couple wins early in the year because it will allow you still access to the playoff. But this is something people are going to fight against. If Indiana or somebody like them has a season like this again and their first 2 wins came over nobody, people are going to cry.
Yep.
So I don't know if that's reason to keep scheduling wins or to schedule tougher insofar as you can. It's not as easy as just pushing buttons and saying, hey, Virginia, come to us or whoever it might be. I think programs in certain positions, the position Purdue's in right now, for example, need wins. They need to schedule wins. The playoff is theory, Don't schedule to get in the playoffs. Schedule to win games, to build momentum, to engage your fan base, to activate recruiting, stuff like that. Don't schedule thinking of the playoff. Cross that bridge when you come to it. If you get there, your schedule is a good problem to have. But I think that Indiana earned their place. I think both things can be true, that we can all agree that, Indiana is not a better team than Alabama, but we can also agree that Alabama lost games it could have won that would have put them in over Indiana. Alabama didn't have to lose to Vanderbilt. It sounds hot takey to say stuff like that, but it is true. Indiana had to beat Nebraska at home, had to beat Michigan, did both of those things. And I think both things can be true. So that's a long answer to a short question, but there you go.
Well, we can only operate on the data that we have, right? And the
Yes.
data that we have is that, do I know that Indiana would lose by 3 touchdowns to Oklahoma? I don't know
And
that.
win,
Alabama did, though, right? So,
winning has to matter.
yeah, no, I agree.
And if you're going to say that an 11-1 Indiana team shouldn't be in because it's not as good as, let's say, Texas A&M, we could probably sit here and have a really spirited discussion about who would win a game between Indiana and Texas A&M. I would choose Texas A&M. I think a lot of people would, but Texas A&M did not win enough games to even be in that conversation. So when we start having these theoretical debates about who would beat who, then the whole system is just broken. You have to reward winning, and you have to recognize hard data and outcomes and results and reward people or dock people accordingly.
Yeah, and I just think that we're going to have more schedules like what Indiana had this year, where more teams are going to go 11-1 in these unbalanced super
Yeah,
conferences, where for whatever reason, it's not Indiana's fault that Michigan and Washington were down, right?
right,
I mean, it's not,
right. Well,
that's just how it happened.
Purdue in 1997 didn't play Michigan or Ohio State.
Hmm.
That was a huge deal, and they won 9 games that year. Without those two teams. With those two teams, you all of a sudden go from 9-3 in the regular season to 7-5, undoubtedly,
Yeah,
because Purdue, even though it beat Notre Dame at home that year, even though it cracked Wisconsin before Wisconsin was really Wisconsin, you look at what happened to them when they had to play Penn State, they got destroyed. And they would have gotten most likely destroyed by Ohio State and Michigan both. And all of a sudden, your 9-3 season becomes 7-5. Purdue couldn't control that. Purdue benefited from it, but they couldn't control it. And you can only control what you can control. So you talk about the non-conference season more than you talk about the Big Ten season. As you said, the Big Ten is a corporation now. It is an 18-team monstrosity in which the schedules are going to, especially in basketball, are going to determine Big Ten titles. And they're going to put people in the playoff, and they're going to knock people out of the playoff. That Oregon ran the table this year with all the crap that comes with traveling east for every time you play on the road, with the exception of your pre-existing Pac-12 members, and you beat Ohio State. That obviously was phenomenal, an absolute feat for them. But I think that the other people trying to get those 2, 3, 4 slots in the playoff, their non-conference scheduling is going to kind of come under the microscope here a little bit. But that shouldn't keep them out if they win all their games. And if the people they're competing with, don't.
no, yeah, I agree with you there.
I lost control of that completely mid-thought. So
No,
if that went
I
off the rails,
no,
that's
I
on
think
me.
the core points are that these schedules are just going to be, we're not comparing apples to apples, and we never are,
No,
because I can't take Alabama's schedule and give it to Notre Dame, and I can't take, Oregon's schedule and give it to SMU. Like, it's just, we're never going to operate in that world. So we're just kind of flying by the seat of our pants here. We can only go off what the data says. And I think, given what the data said, I think the committee got it right, even if some of these games were blowouts. But this whole talk, well, you should have let 12 teams in. The fourth place team got blown out all the time in this format, and the 14 team playoffs.
excuse
So,
me.
it is what it is.
My
Let's
sneeze
just enjoy
reflex
the
doesn't
football.
like your take. Um, the other part of it too is that you know there has been imbalance in these things forever that nobody's
Yeah.
really talked about in terms of the playoff and things like that. Purdue is in the Big Ten West. That was the best thing Purdue had going for it as a program for the longest time. And when Ryan Walters was fired, people were like, we're 2 years removed from playing for a Big Ten championship. Yeah, well, if you were in the Big Ten East, you would have been in last place. So, um,
Mhm.
yeah, great. So things weren't balanced then either. And things are even more imbalanced now because who gets who on the road in this 18-team conference is going to determine those conference championships. And it's those conference standings are going to directly align with these playoff rankings and these playoff seedings. And it's just, as you said before, it is completely apples and oranges for both the SEC and the Big Ten alike.
Yeah, but again, the good news is that we have meaningful football games. Even if they're 38-10 football games, they are more meaningful than the ReliaQuest Bowl.
Yes, and people are watching them. And
people still watch, yeah, sure, but
the players are playing in them.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the other part of this too is that hell, you watch what happened to Purdue after Jeff Brom left in that Capital One Bowl or whatever bowl game that was. Like LSU had Jaden Daniels, Malik Neighbors, and Brian Thomas Jr. on that offense, and they're playing Purdue's JV. And nobody wants to watch that. And TV, at some point in time, is going to recognize the fact that these bowl games suck and say, you know what, we're not paying for this anymore. This is garbage. We know America has a significant football problem. That if college football or football in general was a powder, America would be snorting it, 24 hours a day, every day of the week. But at some point, TV is going to say, look, we need something to put on during the holidays when nobody wants to talk to their in-laws at Christmas. But this is ridiculous, man. We've got a freaking Pop-Tart getting executed on television here. Mm-hmm. That's the most interesting thing about these games. If the players aren't going to play, if the coaches are going to take other jobs before these games, we're not paying for this. So make the playoff 30 teams, that's not realistic, but you know what I mean. This is still gonna expand, I bet, because TV runs the show, and when they're gonna play all these games, I have no idea. It might have to be like your quad screen during the NCAA tournament where there's four games on at once. Go to True TV now for the fourth quarter of Penn State versus TCU. But no, at least these were meaningful games, and they were played on college campuses, which I thought was awesome. It must have been unbelievable at Notre Dame. It must have been unbelievable. The traffic in State College, I can't even imagine. SMU's boosters couldn't get there.
I saw they had to take a bus, right? And they missed the first quarter. Yeah,
poor guys. And
it's crazy. Yeah.
If you've ever driven to a Penn State game before on a game day, those dudes didn't get there. They may as well have gone to Sheets and just stayed there all day because that was a 40-minute drive that probably took them 4 hours, if I had to guess.
You're better off flagging one of the Amish guys over there and having him take you in their wagon and
just walk
over to the football stadium. Because that's what it is, man. It's like Amish country, and then bang, 100,000 seat football. It is one of the weirdest experiences when you go down there and you see it. It's pretty crazy.
Yep.
Appreciate it as always, Brian. I mean, we could talk like this and just kind of shoot the breeze about the college football playoff for another couple of hours. But happy holidays, Merry Christmas, and we will talk to you again next week before the new year.
Same to you, Derek. Hope you have a great holiday.
That's Brian Neubert, goldenblack.com, and that is our show for today. Thanks so much for joining us on this Christmas Eve. Final shout out to our great sponsors, the Purdue Federal Credit Union, the official credit card for Purdue fans, East End Grill and Ripple & Company, two distinctive bistros across the street from one another on the far end of Main Street in Lafayette. The Whitaker Inn for unparalleled comfort and cuisine. Visit the Whitaker Inn. Sand Valley Resort. Celebrate all that the wilderness provides this winter at Sand Valley. Start planning your next winter getaway by visiting sandvalleypursuits.com. The Purdue Institute for Cancer Research, which has a history of innovation and one goal for the future: defeat cancer. Join the fight and donate to the Purdue Institute for Cancer Research today. And don't forget, final reminder, sign up to become a member for the best Purdue coverage. Gift it. Do whatever. Gift it to yourself, to your kids, your dog. goldenblack.com, 40% off deal rolling right now for new subscribers. You get Brian's work, you get Tom's work, you get Carm, you get Alan, you get everybody here at the Golden Black crew with a goldenblack.com subscription. So if you're not already a subscriber, we would love to have you on board. Our next Golden Black Radio edition will be Tuesday. So we'll take you Christmas Eve to New Year's Eve, the final show of 2024. We'll wrap up the non-league with Brian. I think we're going to get Tom back on as well because there's been a lot going on with the transfer portal, some old Boilers leaving, some new coming in, and Barry Odom and everything that he's been doing to put his team together here for year number 1. So a lot to talk about with Tom, and we're going to do that in an extended edition of Gold and Black Radio coming up next Tuesday. But until then, happy holidays, Merry Christmas. Hope it's a great one, and we will see you next time right here on goldandblack.com.